Videos on social media showed riot police intervening in the clashes, with some attackers shouting "Free Palestine," while they also forced those attacked to chant the slogan. Some videos also showed Israeli supporters chanting anti-Arab slogans as well before Thursday evening's match. Taking the social media platform X, leader of the opposition in Israel, Yair Lapid, wrote, and I quote, "The scenes from Amsterdam remind us all of Europe's darkest days. Jews being hunted and beaten on the streets of Europe should be a wake-up call for anyone who still needs it about the rise of anti-Semitism and the dangers of extremism. I call on the government of the Netherlands to find every perpetrator of these hate crimes and bring them to justice." Meanwhile, Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Dick Schoof, said he had followed the developments with horror, adding that he had spoken to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and emphasized that the perpetrators will be tracked down and prosecuted.
Vanaf vanmiddag geldt er een noodverordening voor Amsterdam en Amstelveen. Voor de hele stad wordt een veiligheidsrisicogebied ingesteld. En dat betekent dat wij preventief kunnen fouilleren. Daarnaast zal er in ieder geval dit weekend een demonstratieverbod gelden en zal er extra politie-inzet zijn. Maar laat ik er geen misverstand over bestaan. Dit is een buitengewoon somber moment in de geschiedenis van onze stad. En het doet ook echt afbreuk aan waar wij trots op zijn in Amsterdam. Dus ik schaam mij daarover. Ik schaam mij over het gedrag dat vannacht is vertoond door relschoppers en criminelen. Het is on-Amsterdams en ze hebben zich diep en diep te schamen.
And joining us on this big story is Aina Sukman, geopolitical analyst. Thank you so much, Aina, for taking time out to be with us here on this broadcast. Talk to us. These are horrific scenes, and as described by Israel's opposition leader, reminiscent of the darkest ages of Europe.
Thank you so much for having me here. I have to note that the attack was not merely a mob clash between two groups of fans that has gotten out of control. There is evidence that it was pre-planned and would have occurred regardless of the chanting by the pro-Israel fans at the stadium. The mob came prepared with clubs and knives and firecrackers. And the attack was extremely violent. There were efforts to run people down with vehicles. There were attacks on families with children who were walking down the street. And there were also small organized groups of some of the attackers who followed individual fans to their hotels and stuck them there and attacked them when they were isolated without the protection of the groups of people around them. So clearly it was a pre-planned effort, and there was a plan for violence before the game even occurred.
Right, you're saying that this is not something that just happened on the spur of the moment. If just to clarify, you're saying the fact that this was always there because the match fixtures were announced before the Europa League match between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax. Everybody knew about it. So you're saying that those who arrived in the stadium for the match had a plan beforehand.
Yes, exactly. There was evidence that it was well organized because some of the groups of people who followed individual fans in different directions to their hotels knew to break up in small groups of 5 to 10 people, and they were able to follow them without simply running en masse. And they all came. A lot of these protesters came with weapons. They came with knives. They came with clubs. They came with firecrackers. And you don't normally carry knives and clubs to a football game, even if things tend to get a little rowdy.
Right. Just to understand the situation better, there's also, videos on social media which show Israeli supporters chanting anti-Arab slogans as well. There have been, videos that show that them taunting the Arab fans as well. Do you think that, that was also a matter of responding to what was being dished out to them?
I think verbal clashes are typical sometimes for games, and frankly, this occurs regardless of the city. Unfortunately, football fans are sometimes known for rowdy, disrespectful, and sometimes outright racist actions, but physical clashes are completely different ballgame. Moreover, it's worth noting this despite the chanting, the Israeli fans did not attack the Arab fans at the stadium. So clearly, there was never an intention for this to turn into a mass attack. Clearly, the planning for physical violence was entirely with the mob that was waiting outside, and not all of these people were in the stadium to begin with. A lot of them were waiting for the game to end.
Okay, you're saying that they were waiting for the game to end to do what they had already pre-planned to do. But talk to us right now. The matter is being taken up by the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands has assured the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, that the perpetrators will be brought to book. I want to understand, do you think this is yet another instance of rising anti-Semitism in Europe?
Yes, in some ways, but we have to be clear that if this is indeed an organized attack, it will most likely be organized by specific organizations. This is not merely a spontaneous outburst of generic hatred from Amsterdam residents. This is clearly a coherent, organized effort by specific individuals and organizations, and I don't think it's necessarily a reflection on all of Netherlands or Amsterdam or Europe. It's a reflection on these specific organized efforts, probably financed, probably coordinated by extremist individuals and groups.
So you're also clearly saying the fact that this is nothing to do with the people of Amsterdam or the sentiments across Europe. You're saying that this entire thing was engineered from the back end for that this clash can happen at this particular point in time. So in that sense, there has to be now greater awareness. How do you think a situation like this could have been averted? So many people had to get so many visas to come into the stadium to do what they had to do.
Well, there's several actions that could be taken in the future to prevent this. First of all, organizations that have known extremist links, regardless of their background, should be closely monitored, and their communications should be monitored, because I'm sure when you're trying to organize such a huge group of people, it is impossible to keep it entirely quiet. People use internet, people use social media, people use communications, people gather to plan. So there is ways of preventing mass actions of that sort, because always there is some evidence. It's not a small, very controlled group of cell of extremists. This is a very big mass activity. So there had to be a lot of back and forth communications going on about the time, the place, the plan to follow people, what to bring. This is not a spontaneous action. There had to be some level of communication. Second, the police needs to be better prepared for such disorders. They need to be able to institute mob control measures instantaneously as soon as they see that there is a mob movement in the direction. This is not something that's not expected when you have a group of people who are clearly prepared for something surrounding a particular area and acting in a violent manner. As soon as you see that they're starting some sort of a physical movement towards others, there needs to be immediate intervention. And while there was police around the stadium, given the tensions going on in the city and given the general rise in extremism, there should have been also police presence in other parts, in other areas, in terms of coordination and logistics that would have made it easier to intervene once mob started moving away from the stadium, because as we see from the videos, the police basically had to chase after people, which made their movement extremely ineffective. They were not able to help victims in time because they had to chase after the mob as they went along.
Right, stay with us because we are keeping the focus on Israel. Israeli parliament passed a new law on Thursday that will allow it to deport family members of Palestinian attackers, including Israeli citizens, to war-ravaged Gaza Strip or other locations. This means parents, siblings or children of those found guilty of committing or supporting terrorism will be deported to some other place. The new law would apply to Palestinian citizens of Israel and residents of annexed East Jerusalem as well. This controversial legislation was proposed by a member of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party and was passed with a 61-41 vote. However, Israeli human rights organizations have termed the law as unconstitutional. Some opposition members of Israel's parliament are of the opinion that the new law targeted only the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Remember, about 20% of Israel's population are Palestinian citizens. The Justice Ministry and the Attorney General's office have also raised concerns about how this legislation will be enforced. Here's a quick look at the provisions of the law. The law allows for the deportation of the family members of those who had advanced knowledge and either failed to report the matter to the police or expressed support or identification with an act of terrorism. Relatives of those who published praise, sympathy or encouragement for an act of terrorism or a terrorist organization could also be deported. Israeli citizens can be expelled for a minimum of 7 years and up to 15 years under the new legislation. Many Palestinians in East Jerusalem could be deported for anywhere between 10 to 20 years. The deportation would happen by the order of the Interior Minister. And now, to understand this better, we have Aina Sukman with us. We also have Jeff Balaban, Senior Counsel, ACLJ, joining us live from New York. Aina, I'll just come to you. Let me begin with Jeff Balaban. Jeff, talk to us. This is a controversial legislation. Human rights organizations have called it unconstitutional. Your take?
Well, there are a few things here. First of all, most organizations these days that call themselves human rights organizations seem to side with the terrorists and against the Jews on every occasion. So I have little patience and they have zero credibility. They are more likely to help the terrorists than they are to help the Jews. That's the first thing. Secondly, I haven't looked at the actual language of the legislation yet. It just came up on my radar screen late last night. But let's be very clear about this. Israel, for example, was roundly criticized by the same kinds of organizations for its policies of destroying the homes of terrorists. Meanwhile, the alternative would have been for them to apply Jordanian law, which is actually what the international community would have said they should do in those areas that they took over from Jordan, which was there. By the way, Jordan was there illegally. Under Jordanian law, those same people would be murdered. Those same people would be killed. So the fact is, Israel is incredibly humane. And the fact is that even when you introduced this, you overstated what was going on in Gaza by far. It is not true remotely. Those UN reports we know are false. They come from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is a Gaza terrorist organization. So in fact, this is the most humane possible thing, which is to say Israel, and now you see, based on your other report, Jews around the world are facing a crisis of people wanting to literally annihilate us and destroy us. New facts are being created. New ways of killing Jews are being created every single day. And the fact that the government of Israel is trying to respond correctly by saying, let's take a look at the forces that create this, because we know a lot of them, they don't care if they get killed. They're happy. They've been raised to kill themselves in order just to kill Jews. So there needs to be some kind of a consequence to the families who are raising them. We see the hostages are being held. by these very same kinds of people. So yes, I don't know whether the Supreme Court will hold it. In Israel, the Supreme Court it's very independent and tends to be very leftist. But the idea that there should be more advanced and creative ways to stop the murder of Jews, yeah, that's a good thing.
Okay, stay with us, Jeff. Let me take this back to Aina Sukman, geopolitical analyst who is with us. Irina, tell us, from the face of it all, opposition members even in Israel are saying that this targets only the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Your understanding of this law, and more importantly, how do you think this will be implemented?
Well, thank you so much. First of all, it's hard to call something unconstitutional since Israel does not actually have a constitution. So it can certainly be called objectionable, but it is not. There is not a specific measure that would prohibit this from happening in the body of existing law outside the international law. Second of all, I do agree that it is extremely troubling to deport citizens of any background without due process. There needs to be a process to first review whether citizenship should be stripped away before deporting someone. This is a different case for those individuals who are not, in fact, citizens of Israel, who are residents or who are visitors. They're not entitled to the same level of legal protection and review, and it's entirely fair to deport them if they present a security task. Furthermore, in the past, Israel has implemented measures in terms of what people describe as collective punishment in terms of destroying homes of the terrorists. That measure, while controversial, provided a strong disincentive to support or hide attackers, and also gave incentive to report these attackers to the law enforcement. This is the same type of idea that it would create an incentive for the families of terrorists to cooperate with the authorities. But I don't necessarily think that this is something that is easy to implement, including if there is no evidence that the family actually knew about the plans or were in any way involved in the planning. If, on the other hand, these individuals were involved in the planning, then they should be treated the same way as any co-conspirators would be treated. But again, deportations of citizens is a very difficult issue to implement, and I doubt that that portion of the law would happen without phases of review, of stripping away citizenship if there's sufficient evidence of involvement and so forth.
Right, Jeff, let me bring this back to you. A lot depends upon how feasible it is to implement this. That the question right now rests on also, apart from the law being passed in the parliament, how will they implement it?
So let me just also reflect, again, having not read the law itself, but having read reports about the law, let me reflect to Irina's point that the law does not say it's automatic. The law simply creates a presumption that if there's that if someone's involved in this, that the family has to defend itself, because we see the widespread nurturing of a culture of terrorism and violence and, frankly, genocide. And so it's responding to that by saying, no, the family can it shifts the presumption of guilt, but it's absolutely something that they can overcome. It's not automatic at all. And in terms of implementation, I'm not sure why it's that hard to implement this. But I do think that they're going to have to get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in Israel tends to be very different than the popular will and the public and the public will. And so I think that it will be under very, very careful scrutiny, and I'm not sure if the Supreme Court will let it stand. And that will trigger a very interesting reaction in Israel to its own Supreme Court at this point.
All right, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it at that. Completely out of time here. Jeff Palabon, Senior Counsel, ACLJ, live from New York. Thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on the broadcast. And of course, Aina Sukman, geopolitical analyst, joining us live on the broadcast. Well, thank you, Aina, for being with us on the show. And with that, we take a very short breather over here. We'll be back with lots more on the other side. Keep watching News 9 Live.
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
representation it's also important, you know.
I want to wear this white coat every day and then be a chef.
There are stories. If the name of whiskey is Indri, then there is a whole story behind that.
Cooking food is like a therapy, and eating one is like a pleasure I can give it to myself.
With Lounge Nights, I'm on a journey to celebrate and recognize the best food and nightlife establishments in various cities across India.
Radical presents Lounge Nights every Saturday and Sunday only on News9 Live.
The next Indian icons, beating everyone on the globe, B6E and XEV9E. Mahindra's electric origin SUVs. Catch them at Unlimit India.
You're watching News9 Live. I'm Krishna Kumar. As the Joe Biden administration in the US makes one last push to end the wars in Gaza and Lebanon, the clock is ticking with Donald Trump's inauguration coming up in January. Senior officials in the US have been crisscrossing the Middle East to try and broker peace, but with Trump's election, it seems like the key players, including Israel and Arab leaders, might be waiting things out. Trump has promised to bring peace to the region, but he hasn't yet given any specifics on how. Based on his first term, though, he is expected to take a strongly pro-Israel stance, maybe even more so than Biden. Biden's administration has been pushing for humanitarian aid and peace talks, but with Trump on the way in, Netanyahu and others could be focusing on what the next administration brings instead. There's a sense that Trump will give Israel more leeway on security and military action, which is why the US is racing to make any headway on peace before the handover. And while Biden's still pressing for an end to these conflicts, it's a tough situation, with his leverage fading as January 20th approaches. On to the latest from the United Nations on the Gaza war. The UN Human Rights Office is raising serious concerns, saying nearly 70% of the fatalities it's verified in Gaza are women and children. Now, this data is from the first 7 months of the Israel-Hamas conflict, which started more than a year ago, while the UN count confirms over 8,100 deaths in that period. Palestinian health officials are reporting a much higher toll of 43,000 over the full 13 months of the war. The UN says its data supports Palestinian claims that women and children make up a significant part of the casualties, which it says points to potential breaches of international humanitarian law, specifically regarding the principles of distinction and proportionality in war. In fact, UN monitors verified that the youngest victim was just a day old and the oldest was 97. The report also highlighted that 44% of the victims were children, with ages 5 to 9 being the largest age group. High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk stressed the need for impartial investigations into these incidents to uphold international law, while Israel's military says it takes care to avoid civilian casualties and blames Hamas for operating within civilian areas. There's been no immediate response from Israel to the UN's findings. Waves of Israeli airstrikes have reduced many buildings to rubble in Beirut's southern suburbs. Hezbollah, in response, has stated that it wants to see US actions, not just words, following Donald Trump's election. Meanwhile, Israel has welcomed Trump's victory, seeing him as a leader who will support the country unconditionally.
Time-lapse video captures multiple Israeli airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. Subjected to 2 waves of bombing, one late Wednesday and another early Thursday. At least one strike was just metres from the runways of Beirut's airport. This was the scene of devastation on Thursday morning, whole swathes reduced to rubble. Testament to how negotiations to stop the war stalled ahead of the US election. A Hezbollah lawmaker, asked about US Republican Donald Trump's election victory, said the armed group welcomed any attempt to stop the war in Lebanon, but didn't pin its hopes for a ceasefire on a particular US administration. Ibrahim al-Musawi said it wanted to see US actions, not words. Israel's government has welcomed Trump's return to power, saying he was a leader who would support them unconditionally. The Israeli military has repeatedly battered strongholds of the Iranian-backed armed group Hezbollah in the Lebanese capital's southern suburbs and in the south and east of the country. Further south, in Sidon, a damaged bus belongs to a United Nations peacekeepers convoy. The Lebanese army said an Israeli strike on a car passing through a checkpoint killed 3 Lebanese citizens and wounded 3 Lebanese soldiers and 4 Malaysian personnel with the UNIFIL peacekeeping mission. Israel says it is targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and military assets while avoiding civilians. But Lebanese authorities and Hezbollah point to the widespread damage and soaring death toll. More than 3,000 people have been killed in Israeli strikes on Lebanon over the last year, the vast majority in the escalation of the past 6 weeks. Israel and Hezbollah have exchanged fire for more than a year, in parallel with the Gaza War. Some of the most deadly of the latest Israeli strikes were in the eastern Bekaa Valley on Wednesday. Lebanon's health ministry said at least 40 people were killed around the city of Baalbek. This historic Ottoman-era building next to the city's famed Roman temples was also destroyed. It was the closest Israel has come yet to striking the UNESCO-listed site. Since fighting intensified in September, Israeli troops have fought their way into Lebanese villages. The army releasing this footage on Thursday showing Israeli soldiers in a ruined landscape said to be southern Lebanon.
At least 10 people died after Mount Lewatobi Laki-Laki in eastern Indonesia erupted near midnight on Sunday, the 3rd of November, spewing explosive plumes of lava and forcing authorities to evacuate several nearby villages. Mount Lewatobi Laki-Laki, located on Flores Island, erupted on Sunday, belching a fiery red column of lava, volcanic ash and blazing rocks, according to Indonesia's volcanology agency. Dozens have been injured and more than 2,000 houses and 25 schools damaged. Rescue teams combed through the charred remains of homes looking for victims. A joint team comprised of police, military and search and rescue officials was dispatched to the area to evacuate residents from the nearest villages. Their initial aim was to evacuate around 16,000 residents. The agency raised the red alert level of the volcano to the highest and said a 7-kilometer radius from the crater must be cleared and warned of potential flash floods and cold lava flows in the coming days.
A thick layer of ash blankets Indonesian villages following the deadly eruption of Mount Lewatobi Laki-Laki volcano. Attempts are now being made to evacuate at least 16,000 residents from the area, an official said on Tuesday. Located on Flores Island in East Nusa Tenggara province, the volcano erupted on Saturday night, spewing explosive plumes of lava, followed by a smaller eruption on Monday. It remains on Indonesia's highest volcanic alert status. Authorities have revised the death toll down to 9 from 10, with dozens injured and more than 2,000 houses and 25 schools damaged. Rescue teams combed through the charred remains of homes looking for victims. The bodies of one man's family were retrieved from a smouldering building.
They were my parents, my youngest brother, my younger brother, and his wife and children, all dead.
Officials say they were struggling with evacuations due to the thick volcanic ash on some roads. Military personnel have been deployed to truck residents to school buildings and temporary shelters 12 miles from the crater until it is safe to return. Indonesia straddles the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, an area of high seismic activity where multiple tectonic plates meet.
Typhoon Ying has left a trail of destruction as it made landfall in the northern coastal regions of the Philippines. The typhoon hit the region with wind speeds as high as 175 kilometers per hour and flooded villages, uprooted several trees, toppled electricity poles and damaged many buildings along the way. Fortunately, no casualty has been reported in the typhoon hit area. The eye of the typhoon is now located northwest of Laogai City and is moving into the East Sea. Typhoon Ying is the 13th major storm to hit the island nation this year and has aggravated a calamity caused by back-to-back storms that have hit the country in the recent weeks. US President-elect Donald Trump announced on Thursday that his campaign manager Susie Wiles will serve as his White House chief of staff, entrusting a top position to a political operative who helped him win the election. The appointment was the first of what is expected to be a flurry of staffing announcements as Trump makes a return to the White House on the 20th of January. Wiles will be the first woman to serve as White House chief of staff. Sources say that Wiles, a long-time Florida-based political strategist, is viewed as trustworthy and gets plaudits for her help in managing Trump's successful run for the presidency. As the gatekeeper to the president, the chief of staff typically wields great influence. The person manages White House staff, organizes the president's time and schedule, and maintains contact with other government departments and lawmakers. Trump chose Wiles over former House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy, a California Republican who is close to Trump and has been a frequent visitor to his property in Mar-a-Lago.
Susie likes to stay in the background. She's not in the background. Appreciation for Susie. And
Republican President-elect Donald Trump named campaign chief Susie Wiles as his White House chief of staff on Thursday. In a statement, Trump said, quote, "Susie is tough, smart, innovative, and is universally admired and respected. I have no doubt she will make our country proud." The longtime Republican strategist and fellow campaign manager Chris LaCivita are credited with running a more disciplined campaign compared to Trump's previous bids. The billionaire thanked them both during his victory speech earlier this week, referring to Wiles as the Ice Maiden.
Susie likes to stay sort of in the back, let me tell you. The Ice Maiden. We call her the Ice Maiden. Chris, come here, Chris. Susie likes to stay in the background. She's not in the background.
Wiles previously worked on Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign and helped Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis win election in 2018. She served as a senior advisor on Trump's 2016 and 2020 presidential bids. Trump ran through 4 chiefs of staff during his first term as they struggled to rein in the famously undisciplined president. Now Wiles will be the first woman to serve as White House chief of staff, a position of significant influence. The post entails being the president's gatekeeper, organizing his time and schedule, and maintaining contact with other government departments and lawmakers. Wiles' appointment is the first of what are expected to be many staffing announcements as Trump prepares for a return to the White House on January 20th.
Now we have Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Analyst, Eurasia Group, joining us live from Singapore for more on that big story that we are tracking. Pramit, thank you so much for taking time to be with us here on News9 Live. What headline grabber of an appointment. This is the first woman chief of staff in the US. If not for the first woman president outcome of this election, you have a first woman chief of staff.
Yeah, I don't think Trump is particularly concerned about, or the Republican Party, about male or female. I think for Trump, it's overwhelmingly loyalty and broad alignment with his worldview or domestic view. And she has run, by all accounts, an extremely disciplined and obviously effective presidential campaign. So it's not a surprise that he's decided to give her a senior position. And in fact, in many ways, a senior most position in the White House, because she will act as his gatekeeper. She will monitor people coming in and out. She will decide who gets to meet him. And in many ways, this will be sort of beside him in every major foreign policy or domestic policy decision. Very good, because in many ways, she is seen as disciplined, generally a genuine establishment Republican, and provides the kind of discipline that an often erratic President Trump would require. The only question that everybody has is that if you look at the first Trump administration, nobody seemed to last in any major senior position for more than 1 year. And we'll have to see whether Trump 2.0 is going to be a bit more stable, if you wish, in that way.
Pramit, a good point you make about people not lasting. In this case, you're talking about a woman who's worked with him on the 2016 presidential campaign and the 2020 presidential campaign, and the one, and the fact that she's worked with everybody from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump, and twice with Donald Trump. That's quite the stellar track record to have.
Correct. She will know more than perhaps almost anybody else how to survive Trump. But there will be occasionally a situation where, if you wish, Trump has a tendency, as you said, to go completely off track sometimes. And we will see some really nasty domestic problems, battles coming up, because if anything, Trump's real obsession in this second term will be what he sees as the enemies within the system who tried to put him in jail, get him convicted, and so on, and, quote, stole his election last time. So those are the things he's going to go after. So he's going to get into a battle with almost every arm of the U.S. government. And it's going to be difficult because he's not a monarch. He will fight very powerful institutions in America. Whether he goes after the FBI, the judiciary, he wants to purge the State Department, but civil service rules, a large number of regulations and so on will constrain him. And one of her jobs will be trying to say that, look, there are things you can do and there are things you cannot do. So you have to recognize that a president has limits, which is something that Trump doesn't seem to fully understand.
Well, we can only hope that this time around, maybe he will. Maybe Trump 2.0 will be the time when he fully understand how off track he can't go. But for now, we wrap this discussion up. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Analyst, Eurasia Group, joining us live from Singapore with that perspective. Thank you so much, Pramit, for being with us here on this broadcast. And with that, we take another very short breather here on the broadcast. We'll be back with lots more news and updates on the side. Keep watching News9 Live.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
The next Indian icons, beating everyone on the globe, B6E and XEV9E. Mahindra's electric origin SUVs. Catch them at Unlimit India.
You're watching News9 Live. I'm Krishna Kumar. Donald Trump has won a decisive victory in the U.S. presidential elections. His supporters have been celebrating the win, with some in the state of Miami saying that they are in particular celebrating abortion measures getting knocked down in the state. This report tells you more.
In Miami, these Donald Trump supporters are celebrating the Republicans' decisive win in the U.S. presidential race. Some say they're also celebrating another victory, an abortion measure getting knocked down in the state.
Feliz.
I was happy because, look,
Soy católica.
first I am Catholic and I am a conservative, says Karen Guerrero. 10 states put abortion on the ballot this week. 7 of them gave the green light to constitutional amendments enshrining or expanding rights.
Tell me what Missouri looks like!
Including notably in Missouri, a state with a total ban.
This is what democracy looks like!
But in Florida, a proposal to amend the state's constitution to guarantee abortion rights fell 3 points short of the 60% vote threshold needed. In South Dakota and Nebraska, voters rejected measures that would have added abortion rights to the state constitution. In Nebraska, voters also approved a measure enshrining the state's current 12-week ban that has some exceptions. The results gave anti-abortion advocates their first victories since the U.S. Supreme Court ended the constitutional right to the procedure in 2022. In the wake of that ruling, more than a dozen states moved to ban abortion in all or most cases. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris had campaigned on protecting reproductive rights,
All because doctors are afraid.
blaming Trump's Republican Party for the bans. Trump has said a federal abortion ban is unnecessary and that the issue should be figured out at the state level.
Liberals, conservatives, everybody wanted it back in the states, and I did that. Now the states are voting.
On Tuesday, Democrats had hoped the issue would help liberal candidates secure seats on state Supreme Courts nationwide. With nearly 36 states with seats on the ballot, results were mixed. Democratic-backed candidates in Kentucky and Michigan won contests, while Republicans won in Ohio. In Arizona, voters declined to kick 2 justices who had upheld an 1864 abortion ban off the bench in a retention election.
U.S. President Joe Biden said that setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable during an address in the Rose Garden of the White House a day after Republican Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election over his Democratic rival, Kamala Harris.
For over 200 years, America has carried on the greatest experiment in self-government in the history of the world. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. We're the people. The people vote and choose their own leaders, and they do it peacefully. And we're in a democracy. The will of the people always prevails. Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve. Yesterday, I also spoke with Vice President Harris. She's been a partner and a public servant. She ran an inspiring campaign, and everyone got to see something that I learned early on to respect so much, her character. She has a backbone like a ramrod. She has great character, true character. She gave her whole heart and effort, and she and her entire team should be proud of the campaign they ran. You know, the struggle for the soul of America, since our very founding, has always been an ongoing debate and still vital today. I know for some people, it's a time for victory, to state the obvious. For others, it's a time of loss. Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chooses one or the other. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win.
In Germany, reactions to Trump's election victory are rolling in as German leaders express their congratulations, but also the need for Germany and Europe to step up.
German politicians are congratulating Donald Trump. The German public had hoped for a win by Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, but their leaders will have a different partner to work with.
Americans have voted. Trump clearly won the election. I congratulate him on this. President Trump will take office at a time of great challenges and crises. Things will certainly be different under a Trump administration. Our message is this: Germany remains a reliable transatlantic partner. We're aware of the contribution we make to this partnership and will continue to make it in the future. This also applies to the threat that all NATO allies believe Russia poses to security in the Euro-Atlantic area.
Trump's last time in office strained bilateral relations. Now, with uncertainty regarding Trump's stance on Ukraine and NATO, pressure is mounting on Germany and Europe to strengthen their security policy. We Europeans will now have to take on even more security policy responsibility. Today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. This is not a substitute for our transatlantic partnership. It is an investment in our common transatlantic partnership. Opposition leader Friedrich Merz, who is a leading candidate to be the next chancellor, emphasized the US's role in the world, but also urged for a stronger Europe that can meet the US as a partner on an equal level. For now, Germany is offering its continued cooperation to the US, while simultaneously pushing for a stronger, more sovereign Europe.
Meanwhile, Germany is in political turmoil as opposition leader Friedrich Merz called out Chancellor Olaf Scholz for delaying early elections amidst a government crisis. Merz is pushing for elections as soon as January, calling Scholz's approach irresponsible. While polls show that a majority of German voters agree, 84% want early elections to resolve the crisis. The collapse of Scholz's three-way coalition adds more pressure. Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck of the Greens is even expected to announce his candidacy for Chancellor. Habeck, known for his strong stance on climate policy and industrial support, may shake up the race for leadership in Germany. Germany is facing big challenges. An economy is struggling with contraction, competitiveness concerns, and foreign policy tests like a trade dispute with China and Trump's re-election in the US. Chancellor Scholz is suggesting a confidence vote in January, aiming for snap elections by March, but Merz and much of the public are calling for immediate action.
It's a political earthquake that's been threatening for months. Now Olaf Scholz has had enough of the fighting.
Too many times did Finance Minister Lindner block laws irrelevantly. Too many times did he act to serve his clientele and party. Too many times did he break my trust.
With that, Germany's three-way coalition government is over, unable to compromise over ideological differences. Scholz will call a vote of confidence in himself in January.
This will allow the members of the Bundestag to decide whether they want to pave the way for early elections. These elections could then take place by the end of March at the latest, subject to the deadline stipulated in the Basic Law.
This is the man Scholz sacked. Christian Lindner from the Free Democrats accused Scholz of recklessness in the face of economic crisis.
His carefully prepared statement from tonight proves that Olaf Scholz was no longer aiming for an agreement sustainable for everyone, but rather a calculated break of this coalition. With this, he is leading Germany into a phase of uncertainty.
On a night of high drama, it was the third wheel in this complicated relationship, the Greens, who sounded a regretful tone and warned of the collateral damage.
We also want to say that there was no need for the night to end this way. It was not possible to fill the budget hole even though there were solutions on the table. Different solutions were on the table, and the biggest probably would have been to give further support to Ukraine. That would have been the right answer at the beginning of the day in response to the election of Donald Trump.
Needless to say, the mood among the opposition centre-right Christian Democrats this morning, jovial. But the prospect of a minority government, unacceptable. They want new elections as soon as possible.
There is absolutely no reason to wait until January of next year to hold a vote of confidence. The coalition no longer has a majority in the German Bundestag, and so the Conservative Parliamentary Group anonymously demands that the Chancellor call a vote of confidence immediately by the beginning of next week at the latest.
The
aftershocks are not over. More talks are planned. The way ahead, unclear, but in the end, it will be Scholz's decision.
Ich habe der Fraktion über mein Gespräch gestern mit dem Bundeskanzler berichtet und auch darüber berichtet, dass wir im Dissens auseinandergegangen sind. Der Bundeskanzler hat sich nicht in der Lage gesehen, mir plausibel zu begründen, warum er eigentlich erst in 2 Monaten die Vertrauensfrage stellt und nicht bereits in der nächsten Woche. Meine Vermutung, die ich ihm auch zum Ausdruck gebracht habe, ist, dass er versuchen möchte, jetzt noch Abstimmungen im Deutschen Bundestag durchzuführen, bei denen er uns, die CDU-CSU-Bundestagsfraktion, in eine Lage bringen will, die er anschließend für den Wahlkampf der SPD ausnutzen kann. Das ist aber kein Verhalten, das diesem Amt gerecht wird, und das ist vor allem kein Verhalten, das der Lage des Landes gerecht wird.
And with that, it's a wrap here from my side. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishna Kumar signing off.
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
Representation it's also important, no?
I want to